So Rosie and I work for Chiltern Music Therapy, and we're a not-for-profit music therapy organisation delivering sessions all around England. And we are going to speak to you today about 5 things we didn't expect when we were introducing self-management to our team. So in 2019, we asked our team, what are the barriers to you doing the best work of your life? And this question can stimulate all sorts of answers, and often it's something that we haven't quite given ourselves permission to think about. But for Chiltern Music Therapy, this question felt essential for our future direction. What were the barriers of us doing the best work of our life? So we'd actually reached a point where traditional structure had felt limiting, and it was clear that we were reaching a fork in the road. So we're going to explore our 5 themes, and Rosie and I we're going to treat it a little bit like a conversation, walking through the 5 themes. Please do pop any questions or thoughts into the chat as we go. But what we'll do, because there's quite a few of us here, we'll wait until we finish speaking, and then we'll open up a bit of a discussion at the end for people to share reflections about perhaps how this relates to you and your teams, or do ask any questions to either Rosie or myself as well. So the first theme we wanted to bring to you was holding in mind the why. Why have we gone self-managing? So at the beginning of our self-management journey, we did quite a lot of work around purpose and remits, and we were deconstructing our traditional model and gradually rebuilding this into a more organic structure. But actually, as we were working through this, did it feel obvious that people would, 3-4 years on, still be holding this in mind? And yeah, thinking about the why you begin to embark on this part of the less traditional structure feels important. And I wanted to ask Rosie, as the founder and as someone who's introducing this to our team 4 years ago, how does this relate to you in thinking about your why and your position and what brought us into a less traditional structure?
Thank you, Kasia. And hi, everybody. It's really lovely to have so many people on the call. It's really wonderful being in a position to talk about stuff in retrospect, because I don't have any business background. So when I founded Chiltern, I was a qualified music therapist. That was my career. And so I very much learned everything as I've gone along, which has been a hindrance in some ways and a great help in others, because I didn't come into running an organisation with any expectation at all. But what I knew at sort of 6 years in, I had a co-director as well, Rebecca Atkinson, and we were, it's fair to say, running an operation with 50 music therapists and community musicians hugely challenging, holding the weight of operational duties in mind, as well as particularly being a therapeutic service. There is just that status that goes with our work, where we're holding the clients and their families and their networks in mind, and that's hugely emotionally draining. Both myself and my co-director at the time were still managing our own clinical caseload alongside the running of the organisation. I think it's fair to say we'd come to a breaking point. And it was because one of our colleagues actually introduced this idea of self-management and what's it like to work in a circle rather than a team, was the first thing I can recall. And I think actually there was a great relief in the simplicity of knowing that there was another way to run an organisation. That had just never crossed my mind. And I think in reading the Lalou book, Reinventing Organisations, I just sort of felt like, oh gosh, yeah, well, of course I'm really conditioned, because I went through primary and secondary school in the UK in a really normal way. I was lucky enough to go to university. had lots of different jobs, but my life has essentially been kind of quite traditional. So no wonder I went into business in this sort of traditional way that I would know about, that I would hear about. So kind of knowing that there was a different structure in mind. Something we'd also come across was, as the team was growing, people's own personal and professional needs were really developing. And we'd started to get to a point where we had sort of, you know, maybe 4 managers, 5 managers. So somebody supporting with inquiries and referrals, somebody maybe supporting with holding the services that we were managing to account. And it suddenly felt like, well, actually, we've suddenly got stuck because we had 2 directors, then maybe 4 or 5 managers, and then the rest of the team. And I remember thinking, well, where does the rest of the team go? What happens if they get burnt out in 5 years' time from their clinical caseload? So the why for me felt really common sense. But as you say, Kasia, actually, there's something about people that have come into the team since then, or maybe longer term members of staff who weren't really interested in becoming a manager. What does that structure feel like for them? Do they see the need for a change? And I think that's been the really big thing. I had some brilliant coaching from Jane Pleitling, and she really helped me kind of accept that ability to be able to step back, and that the organisation would be okay. And we've talked a lot about the age of the organisation. Is it the toddler? Is it the teenager? Are you waiting in the car outside the party, hoping they're not going to need you? So all of those kind of analogies have been really helpful. But it's been interesting for you, Kasia. You were leading the team as delivery guardian at that time through that initial change, and I don't know whether that why kept coming into focus for you and for the team, or whether you were having to find different ways of explaining the why.
Yeah, it's such a different sort of perspective and position from where you were at. I was reflecting as you were speaking. I think we moved in and out of different connections with the why, and of course, all the while, that first year we were also going through the pandemic, and it was quite a time to be shifting our organisational structure. And bizarrely, I think it gave us that launch pad. And I think, or my perception is, there was a lot more connection to the why during quite a chaotic period of time, because actually some of the reflections coming out from team members, and also from others who were more involved managerially, it's how could we have achieved this with sort of 3 or 4 people? Actually, we needed all 45, 50 of us to be active and thinking about how we'd approach the crisis at hand. We were supporting some of the most vulnerable, most isolated people across England, and we needed to act very quickly and draw on the expertise of everyone on the ground. And that's what enabled us to move through those initial months of the pandemic. And it really was quite a very bizarre timing, obviously not planned, but I think then sort of taking us a couple of years on, as we maybe got into more of a swing, matured a little bit in our self-managing structure, naturally, as some of the team members who were more out there delivering work and less connected with the operational day-to-day, there did seem to get more of a disconnect, not helped by the fact we are predominantly working digitally. So we really continue to have challenges on our hands in terms of how do we continue to reinvigorate the team and remind us all of why we're here and why we've survived these different points and experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think actually the why changes as we progress. The why that was really important to me as a founder, actually it's fine to accept that won't be of any interest to somebody coming into the organisation today, because they'll have their own personal need. And in a way, the pandemic became its own why. Like, why should we pull together? Why should we all go and above our usual kind of job spec to pull something in? And I guess it leads us into our next theme, which is perceptions of and a need for hierarchy. This continues to fascinate me, and I probably don't have the brain to put it kind of completely eloquently, but when we first explained self-management to the team, rightly or wrongly, we used the terminology, it's a flat hierarchy, because it was such a contrast from the traditional hierarchy. It felt that kind of real, we're really doing things differently. It's a flat hierarchy, felt actually more understandable for a lot of the team. It was like, wow, gosh, okay, so no managers, and how would this work? And how would this work? All these questions were flying around. But actually, over time, we started to think and talk a lot more about natural hierarchy. Some people are naturally exhibit more leadership skills. Other people need a lot more support and the right conditions to grow into being leaders. And I still believe leadership can be seen everywhere across the organization, but it might be to do with life conditions. It might be to do with what's going on for a person within their own role, about whether they have an opportunity to show that. So I was interested, again, from you kind of leading the team, Kasia, sort of how those perceptions of a need for hierarchy, because I'm aware also that natural hierarchy has had its own arguments within the team, and people saying, well, I would be a leader if somebody gave me the opportunity. So what have your experiences been? What have we had to also unlearn from flat hierarchy so far?
We definitely had to unlearn about the flat hierarchy. It felt like that pendulum swing, as you've described. Let's move away from something that's very familiar to something that's completely unfamiliar, and then let's find our point of gravity as a team. And I think to begin with, people were throwing around some quotes from George Orwell. We had a bit of Animal Farm coming out. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And that was kind of, I think people were playing with, what is this flat hierarchy business? And I don't understand, because there's still people who I perceive to have powerful positions or roles. We're not using the word manager, but people are still that there's a perception of authority. So playing with language felt really important to helping people's to explore their perceptions, because I think we are a sum of our parts, so we are only learning as fast as our slowest member, and it's important to learn from each other's perceptions, assumptions, and actually work with that. And being really deliberate about our use of language felt important. So kind of bringing in that, actually, no, we're leading and guiding instead of managing. I
was also going to ask you, you came up with a wonderful phrase, comparison nostalgia, and I wondered if you can explain to everyone a bit more about how people's perceptions of that old hierarchy versus the current hierarchy have existed for people.
I think there's always a tendency, especially during points of crisis or change, for us to want to revert back to something that feels familiar. And at different points in the past 4 years, I've sensed that from different team members in different ways. And kind of looking back with rose-tinted glasses to, when we had this management role, everything made sense, or I had a big red phone, so I could just lift it anytime I was in trouble, and they solved all. But actually, the reality of what was happening at the time was that particular person and role, it was unmanageable, and actually we were expecting too much from that part of the work. And I think it's interesting, perhaps people are looking back because there's a feeling of it feels kind of unstable, unpredictable, unexpected. But actually, it sort of brings us into our next point, that in deconstructing everything and kind of throwing it all up in the air, we've now refined everything. And our point number 3 is processes have never been tighter. And it, in terms of this comparison, nostalgia, as I called it, we can look back and think, oh gosh, yeah, this was better, that was better. But actually now we've digitalized everything. You know, we've got an excellent training arm of the organization. People are specializing in different areas of research, and we've got our way of communicating as a team is so much more cohesive. We've developed in so many ways. And I wonder, Rosie, sort of from your perception as being very much a part of the before, what's your observations of how some of those processes have tightened up, really, or what? How does that relate to you?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think perception is the important word, because for some people in the team, they may have felt more held, and that's because the majority of that holding was going on from between 1 to 5 people. But those 1 to 5 people, you know, I can only really speak for myself, were really, really burnt out, and it was completely unsustainable. And actually the risk levels for an organization in having 2 directors who are burnt out, and then kind of small management team who are just getting more and more stressed because more and more work's coming their way, is really risky for a company. You lose one of those people and the domino effect is horrendous. You know, it's the kind of, if you go under a bus tomorrow, well, actually I was holding all this stuff in my head because I'm the only person that deals with it. So actually both myself and my co-director had at the time had a very different working styles, but even that can't really cover every eventuality for a team of 50. And we always used to say, you know, balls will always get dropped, but it's how they're caught that's the bit you need to worry about, really. And we had to, going into this process, we had to look at decision making in a really systemic way, which was totally new to me. Even thinking about something systemically was probably pretty new, because I'd spent 6 years putting out fires on a day-to-day basis, which I'm sure many people can identify with. But also, alongside the fact that we totally reimagined roles, it means this changes where traditional accountabilities are held. So if you have an admin person, everybody relies on the admin person to do the admin. When you have suddenly split that admin role into saying, well, actually, we want the person that's managing our schools to be wholly responsible for every aspect of managing those school services and supporting problems and supporting therapists and making sure the contracts are drawn up, that means that you have to go through that with a fine-tooth comb and create a process that's really understandable for somebody who's not maybe perhaps administratively minded. So those changes into roles and out of roles have meant fresh pairs of eyes every time and really frequently. And I think that's offered huge power in meaning that everything gets looked at in a way that perhaps would have been quite blind before, to know that I might just not see things because I would be involved in them day to day. And in fact, we moved into looking at our data in a whole new way. So having dashboards, which for me as a visual learner was huge, being able to look at our finances in a dashboard rather than on an Excel sheet just was incredible, and actually then meant we had loads more people in the team who could suddenly understand the finances and the forecasts and the budgets, because we're looking at that information in a different way. So I definitely think that aspect of processes continues to evolve, but I can 100% say from being in the prior, things are in much safer hands for the future as well, because people continue to learn and have to come into those roles. I think our next point was continues to be a really important one. And whilst when we'd initially started to read about so we read Deliberately Developmental and Everyone Culture, found that really fascinating book, and this aspect of bring your whole self to work, so wholeness and well-being and vulnerability and safety have been really important, particularly for us as therapists. We thought, oh, that's fine, we can box that off. We do reflective practice every day, like this will be no problem at all. But I was going to ask Kasia, how did you come through the process of kind of creating the right conditions? I think it's fair to say we still haven't got there completely, but how did you create the right conditions? Primarily also because we were virtually working for the most part as a new thing, where people are developing relationships with each other in a workplace that help them feel safe and help them bring their whole selves to work.
There's lots of different ways to answer that, but the first that comes to mind is thinking about when we were initially launching self-management. We'd started as an operational team with our kind of office 8, and then it was part of my role to bring on board the remaining team, so all of our music therapists and community musicians, and having 30-40 people in the mix and on some of these calls felt like a lot of people. And subdividing into smaller groups, pods we originally called them, felt essential. And this was under the guidance as well from our coach Jane Peitling, as Rosie referenced. And we really did recognize in reality how those smaller, more cohesive focused groups worked. And we started to define our purpose and remit for the pods. And then these became our safe spaces, our hubs, as they're now called, for the team. And they've also gone through different shifts as well. I think initially in coming together during the pandemic, people just needed a space they wanted somewhere to come together, to have an experience with other people and be heard, be held, and have a voice, have something to do, something to help. When we stabilized in the months after and a couple of years after, we were then thinking, well, how are we supporting people out there doing their work? And thinking of, we created nurture spaces, which are even smaller group sizes, but to support people to essentially like an annual review, but in those smaller groups. And we found actually the importance of facilitation of lots of these different spaces really came up, and exploring the difference between having somebody external, so either external to that collective or external to the organization, and how that actually offered a different form of holding, where they're actually not involved in the processes of that group, but also then exploring where we were not as able to have somebody external, rotating the facilitator, but really experiencing that difference between something feeling safe, that had clear boundaries, a clear structure, versus less safe. And actually there were different levels of vulnerability explored within those different formations.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and it also makes me think about that difference in learning styles. We do have members of the team, particularly in our operational side of things, who aren't therapists as well. And we've had to really kind of create a place where people don't feel that there's sort of, well, I understand because I have this training, and you wouldn't understand because you don't have. And actually, we all experience the ability to be vulnerable in different ways. But I definitely have found that virtual working a challenge towards how you build relationships with newer members of staff. I think that remains to be seen, how we build relationships. And I think the hubs that you created and we've evolved into, we're now in a position actually where we've made them much more local again, haven't we? So we're starting to see people meeting up locally, and actually they're building those relationships face to face, whereas they still have a connect to the whole team online through Slack.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Hearing you say the word challenge is making me think of our final points. I mean, we had so many when we were going through these. We thought, how can we keep it to 5? Our 5th one is the challenges of continuous change. And this does feel like the big one, really. And generally getting comfortable with continuous change feels, or can feel, quite hard. And part of our wondering is, actually, is this different because we're a smaller company and we're doing this for the first time? Would it be different in a larger company that's, perhaps familiar with change management, for example? What are the wider implications, and how the external factors impacting us? So, like, what's going on in the environment, for example, and COVID, the pandemic, financial crisis, like all of these changes in our environment are impacting us internally as well. So some of it we can control, some of it we can't. And it's certainly has thrown up a lot for our team. And we recognize some people feel more comfortable in a space of things that are transient, moving, a little chaotic, and others might revert right back and think, I need things to be really ordered, really predictable. And we're still juggling that within our team. But I wondered, I mean, Rosie, what are in terms of some of the changes that we have been through as an organization, and obviously me referencing the external factors, what do you feel those challenges are for your position, for your role in this continuous change?
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I think my own role has evolved so much in the last 4 years. So sort of coming from there being 2 directors, I then moved into being life support role within our life circle, which supports the team, the time that they're in the team. Corporate connections. I was lucky enough to go on some mat leave for a few months, and when I came back from that, it was a real eye-opener, that sort of gap of time, and coming back in as a pure team member was really fascinating, actually, and hugely liberating as well. I sat in a team meeting and somebody said, "Isn't this really weird for you? You would be at the top and you would have planned the day." And I said, honestly, I don't think I've ever felt happier. I sort of in the room and see what's next on the agenda and see what's coming up. And I think there's been great freedom in that. But I think there is something we should just say, actually, as a structure. So we do have a board of directors that now has 6 people, but it's a minimal viable board. So they're not involved in the day-to-day management. They're there as a buck stop. So if there suddenly becomes a risk in terms of safeguarding or finances, we can step in. But other than that, that board are there not to interfere in the running of the organisation or to set strategy or anything like that. But I do think this aspect of continuous change would be a lot more feasible for people in a company which had a lot larger financial resource, and the pandemic, like many non-profits, hit us in an enormous way, and we definitely aren't back to where we were. But actually that real tightening of belts has had huge limitations on being able to say, well, great, we're going to bring this person into the life guardian role, but actually they probably need 6 months of co-working with somebody to really get familiar with that role to be safe. We don't have the finances to pay for 2 people in that role for 6 months or 3 months or probably even 2 months. So actually this aspect of continuous change has sometimes been forced on us in ways we might not have wanted. I guess the success of the system is that some changes are now much more frequently brought about by team members raising attention. So somebody saying, actually, I think this person's been in the role a really long time and I'd love to have a go at that role. And that person then going, oh, but what else will I do in the organization? Because I don't have a finance background, so I can't go and do something in the finance circle, or I can't go and do something in the ops circle because I'm not a natural born organizer. So we're still very much trying to figure out that, and something we had some great support from Ted around thinking about this terminology of how long does a role last, who decides who has it, who can challenge it, when does the next person take it on, you know, is it truly accessible if you don't have a really organized skill set, or can we only say it's open to this person or not? So I think that continuous change is definitely something we're all getting better at. But we were advised at the beginning, you will lose people on the way, and we've lost some brilliant people, because that aspect of change is really tough for people. And I think particularly those people where working up in a career progression means something to them personally. So we changed around our whole salary system a year ago to a badge system. And that's been really fascinating to do, but also throws up lots of other tensions for other people in different ways. So I think the continuous change is really positive, and it makes us a stronger organization. But my God, it's a lot to deal with, I think. But I really probably wouldn't have it any other way. I think I've learned more than I would have otherwise.
That feels like a nice point for us to pause. Maybe it's we as you can probably tell, we've got heaps to share and say, but we're so fascinated by you all joining today, and if it'd be really interesting to hear from anyone that would like to reflect or ask a question. We have one coming through here actually asking, what is a badge system? Did you want to share quickly, Rosie?
Yeah, definitely. So we taken the idea from Scouts or Girl Guides in the UK. You do an activity and you gain your badge. Or Hey Dougie, if any of you know the BBC programme for kids. But ultimately, it relies on experience. So when you gain experience or you take on a role that has specific accountabilities and responsibilities, you gain a badge. And once you have that badge, it can't be taken away from you. So this is what I was meaning about that financial system. So you might get a badge for having been in the organisation 2 years or 5 years or 8 years. And those are badges. If you've held a guardian role, that comes with a lot more accountabilities. That would be another badge. The tricky thing, and that's why I come back to finance, is that there could become a time when so many people have earned so many badges that the salaries then become too high to be manageable and financially sustainable for the organisation. So how we're figuring that out is still kind of ongoing, but it definitely feels like we now have a system that's completely transparent to the team. And everyone could argue, well, there's no argument really. You can say I have this badge because I've held these types of roles and I've worked in the organisation for this long, and that's why my salary is X and your salary is Y. And that's been positive, really positive for a lot of people to also understand the bits of people they maybe don't get to see.
Oh, thanks, Rosie. I was just adding those books into the chat there. Would you be able to add the deliberately developmental one? I can't remember the full title.
Yeah.
How about other people? Dem, go on ahead.
Yes, I'd love to know about onboarding. How do new people coming into Chilton Music Therapy find out how it works?
So sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. It's not helpful. Onboarding. So your question is how do people find out how the self-management system works and how we have an onboarding team, and some part of that works in a fairly traditional way. But instead of just meeting with one person as part of the onboarding, we make sure they meet with all the different parts of the organization, so a representative of the different teams, so they can share a little bit about that team. They'll have a chance to meet with me as culture developer, or now organizational developer, as I think I've been renamed to. It's changing like the wind. And there'll be a dedicated induction into self-management. We think about DDO. We think about give people an opportunity to do a 5 deep survey. So looking at their cultural fit with the organization and how to explore what works, what doesn't work, and perhaps some areas of tension that we could explore together. So there are traditional parts of the onboarding, but then they have that opportunity as well to ask lots of questions, and we have checkpoints offered. And actually something newer we've introduced is a hub buddy system. So for our new members of staff, but also returning members of staff, so from mat leave or periods of leave, they'll be buddied with somebody in a similar location to them, to just be a kind of voice at the end of a phone, someone to go for a coffee with, someone to be a signposter. So they don't need to have the answers to the questions, but they're their kind of allocated person for the first couple of months of being part of the organisation.
I think it's also worth saying we came up with something a couple of years ago, which were in addition to the actual HR kind of contracts we hold, which is a core and a collaborator agreement. Because what we figured out, and I don't know if this is the same for other organisations, some people come into this and they're so interested, oh, this is amazing, and I want to be a part of all of the circles and all of the learning communities that we have on Slack, and yes, like, let me know about every opportunity. Other people go, I'm working for you a day and a half a week, I've got 3 other jobs, I just need to come and do my sessions, do the best work I can do, and that's it. So actually what we get people to sign up to when they join the organisation is to either be a core member or a collaborator. So it shouldn't mean you don't have the same opportunities, but it's that agreement of an expectation from the organisation about what value you bring into the system, as well as giving some relief for somebody to say, actually, it's okay if I don't attend every Zoom meeting. I'm just going to come to the one with my hub once a month, because that's what I can manage, but I can't manage kind of coming to something for fundraising and something for the delivery circle and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm aware we're kind of coming up to time, but there were a couple of other questions about the badge system, which I hope we can answer just in short. But with regards to, sorry.
No, go.
With regards to Sarah's question about how we decide on salaries, as a really quick answer, for our music therapists, we have baseline salaries, and well, actually for all of our staff, we have different baselines, and then the badges are different sort of levels of experience on top of that. So you might get a badge for being with the organisation 2 years, 5 years, 8 years. There'll be different badges for specific levels of risk held. So if you're a safeguarding lead or hold a different level of risk. Rosie, I didn't know if you wanted to add any more to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think there would be any issue with us sharing the badge system, but we have roles. So if you're a supervisor, for example, with more than 5 years experience, that would be a badge, a gold badge, whereas if you're just new to supervising, it might be a bronze badge. And within the organizational risk, this is the bit that we think will change over time. We've also got experience and mastery badges, so to try and reflect things. At the moment, one of ours is organizational change. So if you're a member of staff that has been through the organizational change and has knowledge of how that has been, that is a badge in itself. So we try to use the badge system to reward the values of the organisation, not just the specific work you happen to be doing in the here and now.
Thanks, Rosie. And just, before I take your question, Caroline, I thought I'll put Rosie and my email addresses into the chat, and we'll add our LinkedIn as well. I think you can probably get hold of us via the conference platform too. Please do get in touch if you've got any other questions or kind of thoughts come up. We really be wonderful to keep connected with people and other organisations doing this, because we've really found it can be quite an isolating experience as well, working in this way, but it's just incredible to be part of an event like this, to see so many faces. So thank you so much. Caroline, we'll just take your question quickly.
Yes, did I miss it? I've been cooking while I've been listening, but how much have you been using Sociocracy? That was the part that I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And actually, we started out by being introduced to holocracy before we found out about sociocracy. And there's been a real pull within the organisation, particularly within the circles, around as the hierarchies have changed, that need for sociocracy and the governance that comes with sociocracy have been much more beneficial for us as an organisation, because it helps to give some context and structure to the format and way in which we're working. Yeah, but as it is, none of these things, I think that's been the thing, because none of these are bought off the shelf. We also moved over to employee ownership 2 years ago, and that again has brought another whole heap of different types of governance and things that have been really interesting to explore. So we're definitely still learning that bit as it goes along.
Thank you so much for your questions and for joining us this afternoon. We really want to respect the time of the conference. We appreciate people have got other talks to jump into, but I saw Millie, you had a question there, and if you wanted to reach out to us directly, we'd be really happy to respond. But thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we'll get to catch some of your presentations as well.